Welcome to Woman Power. I'm your host, Lisa Diane Wedgeworth. Santa Monica Cultural Affairs has embarked on a collaborative project to commemorate the history of the African American residents and business owners of the Belmar neighborhood, which was formerly situated in what is now the Civic Center campus. A team has been gathered to develop art and interpretive elements as an educational program centered at the new Civic Center multipurpose field, which is set up to open the summer of 2020. The artwork, interpretive signage, and education plan are being informed and inspired by historical research and a public engagement process that aims to shine a light on underrepresented stories of the community, including the legacy of displacement that the site in part represents. The Santa Monica Arts Commission recently confirmed social practice artist April Banks as designer and lead artist for this engagement process, gathering the stories, memories, and dreams of Santa Monicans and the descendants of those who were displaced from the field site. Banks works with art making as social practice, a form which puts human engagement and community at the heart of its process. Utilizing themes gathered from the public engagement activities and historical materials about the area, Banks, in collaboration with project historian Dr. Alison Rose Jefferson, will shepherd a dialogue with community members that will lead to an artistic interpretation that commits to social justice, commemorates the site's history, and celebrates the rich legacy of African American contributions to Santa Monica life. Joining us today in the studio is Dr. Alison Rose Jefferson and April Banks. Ladies, what is Belmar History and Art?
It's a civic commemoration project to recognize the African American experience in the history of Santa Monica, emanating out of the neighborhood that is where the Civic Auditorium is now, and that was one of the first neighborhoods where African Americans lived in the early during the 20th century before 1950, and it was removed, or the people were displaced when they constructed the Civic Auditorium in the late 1950s. So we're looking to reconstruct that history that was lost and to celebrate the longevity of the African American community and its accomplishments, as well as some of the things that we weren't as happy about there in Santa Monica.
Yeah, and I would say that it's called History and Art because it is at the intersection of historical record. As Alison was saying, it's about uncovering these histories, piecing together the gaps, filling it in with stories from the community, and commemorating it with public art, engagement with the community, and that's all I have.
It's a remarkable history, and it's a project that is exciting, and I'm happy to know that the City of Santa Monica is recognizing this community using art and interactive engagement projects. So, Dr. Jefferson, what is it like for you working with, as a historian and an author, what is it like working with a social practice artist to fulfill this project?
Well, I'm an enthusiastic public historian, and what that means is that I do history outside of the academic institution. And so I like working with people to do community programs, social practice artists, as well as other people that do programs to allow for a broader engagement of the public to learn about different experiences, in this particular case about the African American experience in Santa Monica and the beach. And it's useful because of the fact that some people, their way in which they're going to learn this history and how it impacts them will be through participating in the engagement programs and also looking at the public art and maybe the signage, but they won't sometimes necessarily go and read a book about the history.
Right, so it creates this great avenue for some parts of the population that might not go and read a history book or an article, but they can enter it through interactive activities.
Yes, yes.
So April Banks, as a social practice artist, what is it like for you working with a historian on this remarkable project?
So social practice art is really about collaboration. It's about working with all kinds of professionals, community in particular. And so having Dr. Jefferson's point of view and her expertise really helps solidify histories that are often overlooked. It brings a perspective that I, as an artist, don't have the academic rigor for. It also helps to give me a basis to start with when I'm being creative or making creative work. So it's always helpful to start with something. So it's the concept that I start with.
Right, that's great. Dr. Jefferson, please tell us how the early African American pioneers and residents contributed to making Santa Monica such a unique and vibrant place during that time.
Well, first off, they moved to Santa Monica and they set up their own community there, just like all the other migrants did. And some people would think that that's kind of radical because it was a resort community and it was away from where most of the African Americans were living in the region, which was in Los Angeles City proper. And with that, they figured out how to live their California dreams in this beach community, developing employment opportunities for themselves, sometimes as small businesses, owners, and then also fitting into the economy in terms of what kinds of occupations were available so that they could have this picturesque experience and at the beach. And they also were involved in challenging all the different racial discrimination activities that occurred because of the way our system is in the United States in terms of the Jim Crow era, which is the era we're talking about before the 1960s. So they were fighting racial barriers when they could. California had civil rights laws beginning in 1893, and sometimes they were laxly enforced and sometimes they weren't enforced at all. But for the most part, I messed up there, sorry. So the African Americans fought racial discrimination in the Bay City, and they helped to shape the way in which the city evolved and the way they deal with interact with people of color, and in helping to build the physical infrastructure of the city as well.
You had mentioned the civil rights laws that were kind of laxed at times. What were some of those?
Well, for instance, there was the law that said that public beaches were open for all citizens of California, and sometimes whites tried to keep African Americans from using the public beach. In Santa Monica, African Americans were able to maintain their public beach space even with all the waves of development that came along near Pico. And in some other beaches, for instance in Manhattan Beach and in the El Segundo area near the airport, African Americans had different resort activities that were going on there early in the 20th century, and they weren't able to maintain those spaces because the white power structure took the land away through eminent domain or didn't give them a permit to continue those operations.
History is so fascinating, and we think we know so much. You know, I'm a native Angelino, born and raised in California. We learn about California history, but then to have this layer lifted and to learn more about the contributions of African Americans is really impressive and fascinating. April, please share with us some background as to what the expectations are for you as a social practice artist with this project to help the city of Santa Monica develop an informational, educational, and interpretive program to educate the public about the legacy of African American citizens who were displaced in the 1950s. I know it's a mouthful.
Yes. And there's a lot happening in this project that kind of matches that description. So we're starting with a phase of discovery and research, and we're kind of blending that now into community engagement. So we're working with community in all sorts of forms, art forms. I believe that there's lots of ways to access people's imagination or their desire to be involved. And so through several art forms, poetry, dance, writing, researching archives, and encouraging people to come and preserve their own family histories and tell their own stories. Are some of the events that we have planned. I always believe that food, meals, those kinds of things are a great way for people to come together and just have a conversation. And in that, we're bringing together a community, sometimes people that have left Santa Monica but have roots here. So we see a lot of people coming back, especially this weekend when we had an archive panel discussion about the importance of preserving your family histories.
Okay, so that's great if you don't mind me interjecting here. So I'm interested in the projects that you have that have taken place and that we have to look forward to. So you have had some archival projects already, collecting personal narratives.
We've started the conversation.
Nice.
So it's a process, and so we had a robust Q&A after the talk about why this community, or a lot of communities, are somewhat resistant to archiving. So we talked about how trauma often people don't want to revisit. So if you want to ask your parents or your grandparents about their experience here in Santa Monica or anywhere, sometimes they're like, oh, nothing happened, or they don't want to talk about it. So first we have to realize that there can be trauma, and then often people just don't understand the importance of it, of how their personal stories are significant to collective histories. And then there's a little bit of the technical side, like how do I actually do it? Like, so we started the conversation with two people that we're hoping inspire people to be involved, and then the next step is to actually how to do it, the hands-on workshops for how to do that.
And then what events do we have to look forward to?
So that one, the hands-on workshops, the dance workshop, which is again trying to look at displacement and migration through movement. So our choreographer is going to lead us through some movement that looks at how the body ends up being an archive. How do we hold these things within our body? We also have a tea and conversation that is coming up. I don't know if I should list dates, but in the next 2 or 3, actually in the next 2 months, we have several events.
And we'll make sure to share that with everyone so they can attend and be more informed about what's taking place.
So then that's the community engagement part, and then we actually get into the design of the permanent art, and then we have an ongoing educational component that is required by the commission who selected us for this project. So we actually will pass this to you to finish it, but we have lots planned for the ongoing education part.
So part of the ongoing education program that will go on is that we will have some sort of informational signage that is located at the Civic Center Belmar site, and then also down at the beach area near Bay Street. And we're developing curriculum around the stories, the history of the African American community for grade school, middle school, and for high school students. And we're working on that plan right now with a curriculum designer.
Oh, that's excellent. Yes. So, Dr. Jefferson, If one is interested in learning more about African American history in California, what would you recommend that they read or see, or where they should go to start this journey?
Well, one way is to take a look at my book, which is called Living the California Dream, African American Leisure Sites During the Jim Crow Era. And in this book, I talk a lot about, I have a whole section on the African American experience in Santa Monica through looking at their beach culture activities there, as well as at other beach sites in the region. And the book shows other communities also that are inland and reconstructs some of this history that has been erased or just overlooked in our understanding of the African American experience here in the state of California. There's a few other books out there too, but this would be the first one you need to pick up.
Well, I'm really excited about this conversation that we've had today. We are 3 women in Los Angeles, well, in Santa Monica, but in California specifically, contributing to the history of what African Americans have contributed here. So it's an honor to have you 2 on the show today to have this conversation and to share what's happening in Santa Monica. And like I said, we'll make sure to share all the information so everyone's informed and can attend. And thank you very much for being here. It's been a pleasure and an honor.
Thank you, Lisa, for having us.
Yes, thank you for having us. Really important.
So it's exciting. So.